Some people have a need. A need for speed. Once that need sets in, there is no turning back. It's time to become fast and furious. In a competition where only the fastest survive, the only option is to attack. Attack. Drive to survive.
What's up YouTube? The intro you just saw was a compilation of the second and third round of the Swedish Time Attack series for this season, compiled into a cinematic intro, sort of. Probably the most overused phrase in this entire industry. But anyways, I'm gonna show you a bit more in detail how I made that intro in a moment. If you have watched my previous videos, you might have noticed that I have done several videos about these racing events, and that might be a bit repetitive if you're not into racing and race cars. But the reason is that these events give me as a photographer and videographer so many different opportunities to put my camera gear to the test in lots of different real life scenarios. We have the driver interviews with an LED light setup. We have high-speed photography of moving cars. We have lots of opportunities to shoot some very nice B-roll and experiment a lot with different settings, different frame rates, different filters, different depth of field and so on. So lots of different stuff going on. So that's why I keep doing these videos, because I always learn something new about my gear when I shoot these events. Because if you compare these assignments to, let's say, a product photography assignment in the studio, there's not a whole lot of creativity going on there. It's basically 400, 500, maybe thousands of photos that look more or less the same, and that's not super exciting to make a video about. So for these last two events, I used a mix of the EOS R5 and the EOS R6, and of course with the excellent RF lenses. And I finally, after about 7 or 8 months of waiting, got my hands on this guy, the 28-70 f2. And I haven't actually used this lens much yet, but I used it on the last two events when I was shooting the driver interviews. And I also picked up this little guy, the 50mm, I don't know if you can see there, 50mm f1.8. And I think this lens is really nice because it's good for handheld video since it's so small and so light. And I also thought I would give my variable ND filters another try, because I skipped those during the first event simply because I've had some bad experiences with those, for example with my Hasselblad. But I thought I'd give it another go, and this time I felt I got a lot better results without these color casts and vignetting and stuff going on. The ND filter I use is a Yongsun 10-stop ND filter, and 10 stops means that you can shoot with pretty long shutter speeds and a large aperture opening in broad daylight, so you can get that very short depth of field that you normally cannot do, because you cannot shoot with long shutter speeds and f2.8 in broad daylight, because there is simply too much light, so the photos would be super overexposed. So basically this is like putting sunglasses on your lens. For the second event of this season, I used the R5 for all the driver interviews, so I had that one set up on a tripod in the same place the whole time. And this makes it a lot easier to work fast and smooth with the interviews instead of having to switch lenses on your camera, rigging it off and on a tripod and so on. And for the other stuff like shots from the racetrack and filming B-roll, I used the R6 because I also felt that I sort of needed a bit more training on that camera. Unfortunately, I discovered a small but pretty annoying thing with the R6 when I switched to 120 FPS and then switched back to 60 FPS, namely that I didn't choose 4K when I went back to 60 FPS, because 120 FPS mode is only available in 1080p on the R6. And I noticed afterwards when I looked through the footage that most of my 60 FPS clips were in 1080p as well, not 4K that I had set from the beginning. So that's a thing to remember for the future when switching to 120 FPS and then back to 60 FPS, that the resolution stays on 1080p on the R6. And now to show you how I made the intro to this video, I'm gonna go through the somewhat harsh yellow-orange-ish type of grading on that section. Because color grading is something that I feel that I'm not super comfy with. And to be honest, I have basically no idea what I'm doing. I've never even taken a single course in color grading or anything like that. I'm just self-taught, trial and error. I have no idea what the by-the-book way is to do it. But I mean, for me, really, there is no right and wrong within photography and film because it's such a creative line of work. It's just a matter of a lot of personal taste all the time, basically. So what I'm gonna do is to show you how I did this, and then you can either love it or hate it or think it's crap or fantastic. Doesn't matter. I do all my editing and grading in Premiere Pro, and as probably many of you Premiere users, I have thought about switching to DaVinci Resolve, but I just haven't gotten around to learning it, mainly because I know Premiere so well that all the shortcuts, the keys on the keyboard, how I can achieve the effects and transitions that I want, everything goes very smoothly. And learning and getting really good at a whole new interface, a whole new software, this takes time. I mean, we're talking maybe years. So basically, I'm just staying in my comfort zone, at least for now. So here is my timeline for this intro, and there is not a whole lot of advanced stuff here, really. As you can see, there are mostly hard cuts, only one transition here, which is just a simple fade. Because the inspiration for this intro was the intro part from the first Bad Boys movie, and in that part of the movie, the grading is super duper yellow. So I thought if they can push the colors that far in a Hollywood movie, then what the heck, I'll just give it a try. And in cinematic movies, you rarely see these flashy transitions with spins and zooms and swipes and all that stuff that you can buy templates for everywhere. So I kept it very simple with the transitions, and the main thing I spent time on here was to create this Mexico-style yellow grading and also to match the content with the background music. So the first thing I did here was to bump up the white balance here in the basic corrections to a lot warmer white balance than default. And then I adjusted the contrast and some shadows and highlights here, and I also added a bit of saturation. And already now you can see that we have a much warmer look to this video. And then I continued working on this yellow style thing in the color wheels and match tab. Basically, I just pulled shadows, midtones, and highlights way up to the yellow part of the circle here on all the clips. And since all the clips were not shot in the exact same lighting, some were shot in sunlight, some in shadows, some with backlight and so on, I just kind of scrubbed back and forth and made separate adjustments to each clip until I thought I had somewhat of a similar look to the entire video. And the little bonus from this weekend was that I got a set of photos of a brand new Porsche 718 Spyder with probably the most beautiful wrap I have ever seen in real life. This car has sort of a metallic blue wrap, kind of shifting a bit from dark blue in the shadows to almost some turquoise greenish color where in the hot spots where the sun hits the car. So it was pretty difficult to make this car look as good in photos and videos as it did in real life. But anyways, I spoke a little bit to the owner and we did sort of an improvised photo session in the sunset while the crew striped the car with number decals. And I'm gonna show you what I did in the RAW conversion and in Photoshop with these photos. So here we are in Adobe Camera Raw, and these are the 4 photos that I picked just for demonstration purposes. And on this first one, you can see that this was overexposed a lot. And after my adjustments, it looks like this. So I save the original and then we have the adjusted one. Gonna go into details in a moment. Just gonna show you the rest of the photos here. This is the original and this is the adjusted version. Not very much difference there between those, except that we have a lot warmer white balance. Also, same thing here. The good thing with the R6 is that you have a great dynamic range. So even if you overexpose, you are able to save that in post, like this. Very nice. And this is also a GT3RS that just happened to be parked there. So let's take a look at this first image and the settings. So what I did was, since it was overexposed, I set the exposure to -1.45, as you can see here. Brought down the highlights and changed the white balance a little bit. That's basically it. And then I went in here to radial filter and just made an adjustment to affect the car only. And if we take a look here, you can see that I brought the exposure up a little bit. Contrast, blacks, clarity, just some quick adjustments there. And if we take this one, look at the snapshots here, the original, very overexposed, and then the adjusted version, a lot warmer. So I brought the exposure down a little bit, the highlights, clarity. As you can see, it's not very much that I do to these images in Camera Raw, except for the white balance. If I change the white balance, you can see that it differs quite a lot. But I mean, that's an easy fix. I mean, that's an easy adjustment to make a completely different look of the image, just to adjust the temperature here. And on this green GT3RS as well, if I bring it down here, a lot colder, bring it up here, a lot warmer. So I'm gonna show you the PSD files here as well. Just gonna cancel this for now. So this is the first image, and then we have an added flare, just like a fake flare. And this is just made by using a very soft and large brush, just putting a little fake flare where the sun is actually positioned, or where it was positioned when I took this image. And then I make the flare a bit warmer to match the color balance of the image. Super simple. So before and after. And if we take the next photo, same thing here. I just added a bit of flare because here I use a very large brush, something like let's see, super duper large, maybe something like this. And then to get this effect, I just use the outer part of this brush. And then I made the left side of the car a bit darker. I'm not really sure that I'm gonna keep this. Just experimenting a little bit. And this is the image straight from Camera Raw. And what I did here was that I used the filter, if you go up here, Other High Pass, on a black and white version of the basic layer, the background layer. And then I put this layer in overlay blend mode. And this makes the image sort of sharper without and with this layer. So this is an old school way of sharpening up the entire image, sort of. Going on to the next one. Not very much done here, except for the raw conversion. We have the faked backlight. Same thing here. So to show you, if I just create a new layer and I take a very large brush, white color, just put it on 100% flow, and then just put a dot like that. Just move it out. And if you zoom out, you can just make it a bit bigger, then put it around there somewhere. Easy way to create a fake flare, a fake backlight. I would also like to highlight the phenomenal autofocus and tracking capabilities of the EOS R6 and the EOS R5 as well. And I will use the same blue Porsche as an example and show you a series of shots taken with the R6 and the RF 7200. Because those of you who have tried shooting moving race cars to get that motion blurred background with a perfect razor sharp car, you know that you usually get a lot of crappy shots among the keepers. A lot of them are slightly out of focus, you crop the car sometimes, your camera movements, your panning isn't perfect and so on. And many times the problem that the camera has when tracking is that the distance from the car to the camera changes very quickly when the car passes you. And it's moving sideways at the same time as the distance is changing. That also depends, of course, on how you are positioned, how close you crop in camera by zooming, how fast the car is moving and so on. But let's just say that the faster the car is moving, the more difficult it gets. And with my 5D Mark IV, I never got all the shots sharp in a series of 10 to 12 photos taken in a row. But I just want to show you this series of the 718 Spyder and to zoom into 100% crop here. Because all the images except 5 in a series of 23 shots taken at 20 seconds, 20 shots per second I think, or if it was 12, I'm not sure. But all of them except 5 are tack sharp, and I mean, those who are not tack sharp could easily be used in a lower resolution as well. And this type of photography is not super easy. I mean, it takes a lot of practice to get really good at it. But with this, I just want to show you that now I know, at least, that the gear I have has the capabilities for this kind of photography. And then it's really up to me as a photographer and my own skills, and that's really the way it should be. And just to show you how the tracking looks when shooting cars with the R6, I went outside and just recorded a few clips on my Atomos Ninja 5. This is of course not the same thing as race cars at the racetrack, but at least you can get a glimpse on how the tracking and the autofocus works. So when I move my focus point with the joystick and start focusing, it locks onto that object and stays locked on. I have my servo AF set to case 1, versatile multi-purpose setting, and I think this setting does a great job, so I haven't really tried anything else actually. And for the custom settings I have made to my R5 and the R6, the autofocus button is this button right here, the AF on button. And I strongly recommend you to check out this video, putting that in the description as well. I use the AF on button in servo AF mode with tracking with face recognition disabled when I'm shooting racing cars. So that's the autofocus method for, I don't know if you can see, shooting moving race cars. And then I have set the star button here to activate eye autofocus, which means that I can track humans' eyes just by using this button instead of this button when I'm focusing. And I've also disabled the focusing function for the shutter button completely. So this button is only for taking photos. And this is just an awesome setup because you can super easily switch between different autofocus methods extremely fast, depending on what you're shooting, if it's people or if it's moving objects. And it takes a bit of practice before you get the hang of it, especially if you're used to focusing with your finger on the shutter button. But when you start to learn this setup, it's awesome. But all that's explained in this video I'm putting the link to here, so do yourself a favor and check that out. That's all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you found it useful and entertaining, feel free to click those like and subscribe buttons and keep an eye out for more content from real-life assignments with the R5 and the R6. Take care, stay safe, bye! If you found it useful and entertaining, feel